Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. And today we're going to start with a really quick story, which is this. I, Kelsey, the host, am multi passionate and had a hot moment of wanting to potentially buy a wedding venue. And I quickly went to the podcast world because I don't know if you know this, people, but it works kind of like Google. I searched for an expert in industry who maybe could give me some support in how to make this big decision. And I found Ameé, her podcast. She was actually a guest on a show, and she's an expert in this field. But that is just the tip of the iceberg of what she has to offer. She's really passionate about leadership, humans, running a business, human resources, and how those things all intersect and ultimately help us be successful in industry and in our personal lives, or maybe some areas where we have some room for improvement. So, Ameé, I'm so glad to have you here. Could you first just kind of tell us today you all the different things that you have going on, and then we will kind of walk the path of how you got here?
Sure. Yeah. And I know I'm one of those people that if you were to, again, if you were to look at my resume, you'd see I have woven through a lot of different careers and industries. And so, to say who I am today is really just a snapshot of, my moment in time. But, right now at this moment, for the last about year and a half or so, I have actually taken a lot of the experience that I have earned and developed over in business, owning my own companies, doing business development and marketing and sales. And I speared it into the world of recruiting. And as many people know in this world, in the last couple of years, we've dealt with great resignations, pandemics, and there's just been this shift in the human resources field of understanding how to hire and retain talent. And believe it or not, all the 20 plus years of experience that I've had as a business owner, as well as, again, a marketing and branding expert, all parlayed into it. So I'm sitting in this realm on my resume list of all the things that I've done, and I'm sitting in the bucket of human resources as a consultant. And so I'm consulting on talent acquisition, recruiting processes, and also leadership development so that we can, do better with retaining people and communicating people and getting productivity out of it. And that, of course, came from, the work that for some people that know a little bit about my journey, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit, started back about 5 years ago of really veering into mental health and the world of neuroscience and psychology, and realizing like, oh my God, here I was trying to solve my own personal problems and issues, and I'm finding that it's not just me, that these are some really great lessons that could be shared and applied to business today. And so, like I said, I fully, I have to laugh. Like, I'm at the age where there's just been so much on it that it's a great big toolbox. It's more like a semi truck of tools I load behind me and drive around, because I've worked in, again, so many different fields, so many different roles. I've learned every one of them, and I just keep going and going and going. So, yeah, I've become now a human resources, expert. And I've been teaching people in specifically that area. So yeah, it's a little weird. Sometimes I feel a little chaotic myself, but I can see where everything kind of connects.
Yeah, I don't. I think it makes perfect sense. But to the person, you're right, reading your LinkedIn or, you know, reading the bio that's right in front of me, it may seem overwhelming, but I totally believe all those experiences have a purpose. And when you can see kind of the common thread between all of them and use that in what you're doing today, that's where the magic really happens, because then you're doing stuff that you're actually excited about and you genuinely understand from a personal standpoint.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And for me, the red thread has always been that I just love people. And going all the way back to even being a kid and in high school, like the study of humans and our behaviors and our interactions with each other has always been, really exciting for me. And that if I were to look backwards and go, can I see that same thread traveling through my history? And I will, because when I was in engineering in college, I chose to go into the field of engineering and design that had the most impact on the human experience and the emotional experience with buildings. I went into lighting design because you can actually make people feel a certain way about a space through the use of lighting. And I studied psychology and how do you apply psychological principles to lighting design. And then that evolved into, my manufacturing business that I ended up starting after consulting, which was a master's, getting my master's degree. And that became a famous story for about 10 years when I was in the world of green building construction, and I was interviewed on TV and talking about that all the time. And the thread was, it was successful because I understood the principles of human desire and interest, and I understood how to market something that didn't exist to people, not in a manipulative, sneaky way, but just understanding like what really matters to a customer, either how you do your business or how your product is designed. And so that was like that translated. Then I go into weddings, totally weird path, because I met a guy and I was like, I could do this. And so then but the success of those businesses again relied on the fact that I understood, again, desire. What do people want at their wedding venues? How do they want to be treated? What do they need in terms of making their decisions? And these are all, again, applying psychology to that. And again, all in all, so it's always been the quest of understanding our relationships with each other. And the successes that I've had have been from realizing that every business, every job I've ever had, it's me and a bunch of other humans working together. And how can I work with these humans, and how can we all get the best out of each other? And I think that's been like, that is the one thing I see as a common thread through all of the things that I've done, even if the industries and the position titles have all changed along the way. So
How have you known when to pivot? Because you've accomplished and, shifted in like big pivots, not just the subtle ones. So how do you know in your own bones that it's time?
oh man, well, sometimes, to be honest with you, the pivots weren't my choice.
Mm.
And that was why in 2017, I really had to figure out, like, why do I find myself growing in a job or in an industry, and then suddenly, not at my choice, being bounced. And I would say, cut off. And I had one experience, which was with my manufacturing company, which was the heartbreaking one that started, a downward spiral, honestly, for me. Um, and so that happens in life. I'm just going to put that out there. Sometimes we don't know we need to pivot. The universe just kind of knocks us to the curb, and we have to pivot. And then we have to figure out, where do we go? And so, back in 2011, the recession was going on, not unlike what we're kind of experiencing right now, post-pandemic, or, dealing with the outfalls of that. And I had brought on a business partner about 2 years earlier, because we were trying to weather the storm, because the building industry was taking a huge tank. I mean, housing was collapsing, markets, because of the real estate bubble and the tech bubble. So, when I brought on a business partner, that only lasted 2 years before that relationship just imploded. It was abusive. It was toxic. And it got down to the point of where I refused, to do and behave in a way that he demanded I behave in a way. And so he, locked the doors, changed the locks on the building of the company I started. And it was like, okay, well then screw this. That's how I got into weddings. Screw this. I started dating a guy. Yeah, wedding's great. And I'm going to do that now for a while. And I did that only to have that relationship, that personal relationship that was integrated with the business relationship, also fall apart. And I didn't mean for it. I didn't want it to happen, but here it was. It was coming to an end. And that's when I was like, man, I don't think I'm cursed. I don't think that I'm destined to be the person who starts great businesses, has great business successes, but then somehow ends up like sitting broke and penniless at the end of all of it, while somebody else takes it and runs with it. What's really going on in here? And that's what catalyzed that self-reflection of, what am I accountable for? What's going on in my life? And that's when I began to unpack a lot of that stuff that's related to trauma and dysfunction, and what we learn to be as relationships, that if you've grown up in a certain way, you think that you just have to deal with people that are untrustworthy, and that it's just your job to fix all the people around you. And I had just realized at that point I had too many relationships that I felt like I was there to fix them.
Mm.
And as a result, they ended exactly the way one would expect. Somebody being deceitful and dishonest, and kicking you out when you no longer could tolerate the levels of kind of toxicity going on in there. So those are the big things. And my accountability in that was not being aware that that's what I was doing, that I was sabotaging myself consistently over and over again. And so again, pivots, not my choice. After that, then it became thoughtful, right? It was recognizing opportunity. And so the pivot from the coaching of working with just entrepreneurs and business owners, I've always had this mindset of, sometimes we set up great plans and then they don't work out. And instead of being like, oh man, my plan sucked, I'm just like, you know what? I bet I missed something, and I bet something's coming that I just didn't plan for. So let me just pause for a moment and see what unfolds. And I have these moments where you have to almost stop and pull back a little bit, because you're grabbing and driving so hard forward. that if you give yourself time to relax, you see what the pivot in the direction is that you're supposed to go. And in that case, somebody approached me and said, we have this company that is having difficulties recruiting for these roles. Is this something you think you could look at for us, because you've owned businesses and you know a lot about business and stuff? And when I got into it, I realized that, yeah, actually, this is a marketing job. Like, this recruiting element that they were dealing with was that. And the pivot felt natural, because it was like, well, I mean, I'm qualified to do this. I may not have ever actually done it in this way, but why not? So that, I think part of pivots is also being fearless to just say, yeah, sure, I'm willing to give this a try. If it doesn't work, doesn't end anything. Like, no, life doesn't end at this point. So, just kind of roll with it. And that's why you end up seeing a lot of these diversions of just being a willingness to try and go and see, and move around in that way. Does that answer the question?
Totally.
Okay.
I think that's what people need to hear, is just the honest truth that sometimes you don't have control over those circumstances, but then eventually self-reflection, circumstances change, and maybe you get to a point where you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so many people, especially entrepreneurs, I don't know that people talk about this, but they set on the path of owning a business, they do it, and then there's certain people that stay and they love it, but there's other people who maybe have a desire to go in a different direction. And that going from I have a business to a different business is a scary leap. And I think a lot of people don't actually explore it for fear of failure or identity crisis. Who am I now? And
Mm-hmm.
and you've done it fearlessly, again, whether on your terms or not, but you've found a way and now you help people do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. You hit on something there too that I think that does. And I even have some of those own identity crises myself. I mean, again, I've had so many identities. It's like, what am I?
Yeah.
But I have had those, those moments too, where you're just like, man, if I don't keep plugging away at this, then, have I failed? And I usually dismiss those thoughts pretty quickly. They're normal to have them. So even if you're, fearless and, resilient, you still have moments of doubt and whatnot. But yeah, it's, the ability to be able to be open to the change when there's so much resistance working against you is okay to do that. The real question or the magic in all of this is, sometimes people will talk themselves out of things and say that it's just because it's the right thing to do, when in fact it could be self-sabotage. It could be, coming up with all of the negative scenarios that could happen and never giving themselves a chance to even try and test the waters and fail at it. And so it's a complicated, subject when we talk about making changes in our lives, whether they're ones we want or ones that we choose. They're never easy decisions to do, even if they're the right decision. I'll put air quotes around right, because sometimes even right decisions are wrong, and even the wrong ones turn out to be blessings, right? It's just a matter in being able to, find out of every choice and decision and change that you make something that's good to build on, that you can take forward into the next direction, whether it's in, 5 minutes or 5 years.
Absolutely. How have you navigated that identity shift, especially, titles like engineer, entrepreneur, photographer? I think some people kind of really get hooked with the name describing what they do so effortlessly. And when you're making these shifts and that changes, it's almost like you have to reinvent yourself and also be more confident that you don't have to hide behind the title. So what's your journey been with all of that?
Yeah, and I definitely had my moments, especially of, where the title was the identity, right? And that's in the time period of life of where you really can connect that to confidence and really feeling yourself confidence. And this is something that somebody just sent me a message actually today, that they had seen an interview that I did some time ago where, I've been the person who's confident and unconfident, generally confident, right? Confident enough to try something that I know I'm probably not going to succeed at, but what the hell, give it a shot anyways, right? But there is also the roots of the self-sabotage for myself was rooted in lack of confidence or lack of, some self-limiting, beliefs. And so for a while, titles did feel like the way to demonstrate my competency and demonstrate I deserved this, I deserved to be there. And I think that we've all probably at some point in time will feel that way of like, I feel so low in other parts of my life. I feel so unfulfilled. I feel so neglected and unseen, that the only way I can be seen is to be able to have a big label next to my name that makes me feel like maybe you don't appreciate and value me. And this is usually where it came from. It was like in my home life, feeling feeling pain, whether it was, the situation when I was in an abusive relationship. Well, that title mattered to me because it let me know that I wasn't this person over here who was also, being gaslit and, psychologically abused constantly. Right. So when you can heal some of the pain, either through removing yourself out of really terrible situations, but then also really realizing that, no, you didn't deserve that. That wasn't really who you were. And even though you said you knew that was the case, we still kind of feel that burn and that pain. Right. You get to a place where then, okay, I don't need a label because I now have this sense of self-worth that cannot be taken from me, and it cannot be bestowed on me because I have cultivated it and nurtured it within myself. So it lives here inside my chest, and that it won't go anywhere, and so when we have our hangups about what do I need to label myself with, and I say that hang up and I kind of want to take that word back because that makes it sound negative. But when we have those ideas that title has to be really important, I just like to challenge people to think about it. Is it because you don't feel respected in your field? And I've been in that situation as a woman working in a lot of, traditionally male dominated industries. That title is how I could walk into a room and command some respect before anybody knew me if they were biased already against me because of a gender belief. And so that, that can have merit, right? Like we can choose that. I've seen that for a lot of women, that they've I need to have a bigger title than this because otherwise I will have no one's respect. And that's painfully a truth. But if that's not really the situation, it's about having this level of importance, then I would just be like, okay, are you feeling unimportant in other areas? And how do we kind of take a look at that? Because we're a whole human, and not feeling good in other areas of our life always comes out in business, always, whether it's in our work relationships or how we run our business. And that can be the biggest thing that sweeps the dirt out from under our feet, is not having a wholeness and balance, across all areas of our life. We can't improve our lives through our business, which is what I did for years. That's why these pivots were not my own to be made.
Whoa.
Because I tried to fill in through the business the gaping wounds over here and not actually fix the things, that were sucking me dry and, and hurting me on the other side.
What do you think? I mean, this is a nuanced question, but what do you think makes a leader or a business owner successful? And I think successful, of course, definition is different for everybody, but just in the work you've done, the clients you've worked with, your own business, what do you think really makes someone successful?
Again, it's going to be self-awareness, and I'm not going to be the only person that will tell you that, because self-awareness it's that ability to be vulnerable. It's that ability to be messy. It's that ability to be able to, when we have deep levels of awareness, and also grace for ourselves, you have an easier opportunity and a better chance of also demonstrating that towards other people. Maybe they don't have deep levels of self-awareness, but you can see what their challenges are, and you can then help them, because usually we learn best and form good connections with each other by modeling what it is that we want or need out of that relationship, right? We talk about that in personal relationships, that if you want better communication, be a better communicator, right? Show what that communication style is. When we're parents and we want to teach our kids how to do other things, we don't just yell it at them, right? We actually show them and we work them through that. And it's difficult to be able to do that effectively unless you are aware and can sit with your own failings, as a human. And call them failings, or just call them the foibles we all have, right? Because nobody's perfect at this. But self-awareness also, more importantly, allows us to be tuned into our own emotional temperature and how it goes up and down. And with self-awareness, we can do a better job of re-regulating ourselves, because oftentimes we end up making I'll call it a mistake in how we communicate with another person or how we treat another person, because our internal emotional trigger has been kicked in and we are reacting responsively to something inside of there. And self-awareness goes, oh man, I'm feeling really anxious right now about this whole situation. I need to take a minute and calm myself down before I go and make a decision, or before I go call this person, or before I answer this email, or, say something I'll regret, or do something that I'll regret. And if you don't know that you can see that in yourselves, or you don't know how to do that and calm yourself back down, or re-regulate yourself to a normal place, you will be tripping over yourself over and over again. You'll either have unnecessary conflict, You'll have constant misunderstandings. You'll make poor financial decisions because you're responding from fear or ego or whatever it is. And so without any of that, like, that's what happens either in when you own your own business, or you're leading a team, or you're just a teammate with other people in your company. And that's definitely what you're going to see from, again, that's what I've noticed. That's usually what I'm coaching people with. But when we talk about people we admire, we tend to admire people who validated and saw us and understood us and took the time to sometimes be patient with us and gave us the resources. They identified the resources that we needed to be able to grow, and either supported us in that journey, or again, helped us and mentor us in whatever way that we needed. And they took the time to know that. And again, that patience to do that starts with ourselves.
Ugh, that's a great answer. Yeah. It all stems from there, and I think oftentimes people think they're searching for something, more of a shortcut or more kind of like a secret like route people need to take, but it starts in honestly.
It really does. And,
Yeah.
and again, it's that that can feel unsafe for a lot of people, right? So um when you go to that place of like, yeah, I'm not going to beat myself up, right? Like, I've made mistakes, I have a whole host of them. um but it's not like saying, hey, well, you made all these stupid mistakes, and don't do it ever again. It is the fact that we do make mistakes. And some of the things, and this is one of the things that I talk with people about too, is who we are and how we show up as adults right now is a function of many things, right? The nature versus nurture argument. And the answer to that is that it's both. We are both of those things, right? There's a part of our temperament that we're born with. It's the genetic combination of, DNA that we got from our parents. And so there's things that we've inherited that will define and kind of come out in how we respond at times to the world around us. Not all of it, but part of it, right? And one example is, we tend to be, we talk about our reactions to conflict or stress or fear, fight or flight, right? And then people are like, well, sometimes we fawn and sometimes we freeze. But really, when you drill it all down, you're either the type of person that prefers to run, or you're the type of person that prefers to fight back or step into danger, right? Then there's those intermixed levels. Like, sometimes we all freeze because we don't know whether it's safe to run or fight. And sometimes even fight, it's like, this isn't the hill I'm going to die on, so I'm getting out of here, right? But it at our core, we are one or the other. And we didn't get to choose that. That's not a choice that we make. We just didn't decide that I'm going to be the person that's going to feel trapped in the conference room and wants to just run for my life when something happens,
Yeah.
or the person like myself, which is, if you look at me the wrong way and you say something really disrespectful, I might hit you, right? Like, I'm fight, and I've
I'm
always known
fight.
that about myself. That is part of that temperament personality that we had no choice over. And then the other part that really shapes us is who we are, the habits we've learned about interrelating with each other, how we communicate with one another, come from all of our childhood experiences, right? The things that we were shown and demonstrated and given or not given while we were kids. And those are also not our choice, right? So we tend to arrive in adulthood with everything that was given to us either by birth or through the experiences that we have. And then we go on judging each other for the things that none of us had choices over. And that's where the self-awareness part comes to understanding that, like, no, I'm not real happy with how the fact I get nervous about these things, or I'm not real happy about the fact that my tendency is to get angry when when somebody says something to me disrespectfully. But I can change that and feel okay with that, as opposed to the shame that might be sitting in that background, that said, you have no right to be mad, or you're a sissy, or whatever other negative words that we may have had that have shaped the way we believe and feel about ourselves. Um, but yet it is vital. I mean, it really is. And yet we don't really have a lot of tools out there for us to teach ourselves how to do that. And so we're all kind of like figuring it all out as we get through life. And I try to do my best to help people with that kind of stuff, because I know it's hard. I've done it. I've been doing it, still do it every day.
Ah, that's so great, and so not a direction I thought we would go, but in the best way. So thank you. I
Sure.
want to dive into imposter syndrome a bit here, because I think there's people listening who maybe they have a desire to start a business, or they found themselves in a business that maybe they don't actually know the industry very much. And you, with the wedding industry, and you with what you do now, your entry point was you just kind of got thrown in. So what advice would you speak to that person who maybe doesn't quite know how to build authority in a brand new world they just entered in that sense.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, and imposter syndrome is something we typically hear women talk about, but in reality, men also experience it. So it's
Yeah.
not just a thing. And imposter syndrome, was coined, I think, sometime around the like late 70s, early 80s. A couple of women identified it in their practice with they were meeting with people that were saying that like people that were well qualified and yet didn't believe that they were, right? And so if you're entering into an industry, I always come back to this one, look for the facts that your beliefs are either true or not true.
Mm.
Right. So the fact is sometimes we have to pep talk ourselves with and it's not like fake pep talk, it's real pep talk of like hear the voice that says you're not qualified to do that and challenge the voice inside by saying, okay, why am I not qualified? Okay. And then be able to counter it with evidence that that's not actually a true statement. Right. And that's just an exercise. And again, that exercise varies on how you do it or how you perform it. But I like to, every time I've pivoted into a new industry, and I had this conversation yesterday with some people about this, I spend time being a student first.
Mm.
Right. Sometimes we feel we put an unnecessary pressure on us to be the expert today. Right. And that may not be necessary. That's just something you've put on yourself to be able to do that. You're probably still an expert for some people, maybe not all the people out there. Right. But there's somebody out there that you are probably an expert to. And when we hear that a lot, and I definitely talk to that a lot with people. So first of all, find out, who are you an expert to today? If it's not everybody, that's cool. You don't need to be, the leader of all the things today, right? But identify your list of people that you do know more or can help or have a service that they actually need. And then be willing to be open to learning more so that you can build and develop that expertise and define what that looks like. Is it classes, right? Is it to work with certain clients and learn from those clients? And I would approach, new clients, working with them like, I'm here to learn about this industry. So when I pivoted from, being a business consultant coach working on marketing and branding into recruiting, I'm like, I'm going to be a student. I'm going to spend 3 months asking questions, finding out about the industry that I'm in, and finding about the techniques and strategies that are being used. I'm not going to come in and pretend like I know everything. I'm going to actually come in and go, teach me everything. Let me learn this, because that's how then you can actually come up with better solutions. And that also builds your toolbox. I mean, that's how I've grown my toolbox, is every time I pivot, I learn. And I spend some time learning that. And when you do that, inevitably, guess what happens? You become a pretty good expert. If you go in not willing to be able to take that path for a few days, for like, and like I said, I usually spend like 3 months, saying I'm in a role of asking more questions than I have answers for. And that takes some confidence to do that, right? Because we feel like, well, I have to have all the answers. Yeah, maybe not. Go ahead and just see what you can find out. And maybe you find out that, yeah, actually, here's the funny thing that happens. As you're taking this quest to learn more, you realize, I already knew that.
Mm.
Dang, maybe I am the expert. Right. And then that helps overcome the belief in your system that you don't know what you're doing, of like, well, gosh, every time I take a leadership class, it seems like I end up telling everybody like how to do the leadership things, right? So maybe I'm doing okay. I know enough to be able to teach a few people, or, whatever the industry that, somebody might be in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, great answer. What if you were to start a business tomorrow, maybe your first one ever, what would you do differently with all of the tools in your semi truck behind you?
The truckload of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Starting the business. Well,
Mhm.
um, it will depend a lot on the situation. I think that it's really important to have your financial well-being taken care of. And I do caution this. I wrote about this in my wedding venue book. I wrote about it in my other book, which is, if you aren't sound with finances on day one, doesn't matter what your business idea is. If you aren't disciplined, if you if you can't sit down, balance checkbooks, pay bills on time, if you can't sit down and work monies and do projections or any of that stuff comfortably from day one, don't start your business yet, because the rest of it will not follow suit with that. And I have seen way too many people. I keep seeing these furniture flips on Instagram reels right now and stories of people talking about how they've bought a piece of furniture for $50, sold it for $400, and made $350 on it. And I watched them labor on this thing for like 3 weeks and go, you did not make $350 on it. You and that to me is like a red flag. So anybody that's listening to that, if that's how you're thinking, I want to point out, you're not paying yourself. You've undervalued your time and energy. You're not really looking at the real cost of doing business, and you'll never be able to expand your business, because if you don't understand how much it really costs to do the things, and to actually your cost of sales, the value of your time, which is worth more than what we generally pay ourselves in our first businesses. Because trust me, I worked a lot of businesses, air quotes, for free, putting in a lot of time and energy, and found ways to spend my money on other things rather than on actually a salary for myself. And guess what? Those businesses are not sustainable. So that's the day one in any business. Make sure that you actually understand and feel comfortable. And sometimes people, especially in women that I've seen, don't feel comfortable with money, and they don't feel comfortable with finances, and actually are afraid to look at numbers. And this is an affliction that affects a lot of Americans, that money is an uncomfortable topic for us. And it's like, well, I can't afford to pay myself. Well, then you're a terrible boss. Don't work for yourself. Would you work for anybody that told you that they couldn't afford to pay you? No. So why would that be you doing that to yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What do you think people get wrong with marketing? I mean, we didn't even really go that far down that road, but you mentioned it a few times. So what do you think people get wrong with it, especially businesses?
The first thing that I think that they fail to do is they fail to do market analysis. And this is another one. In my entrepreneur book, The Fearless Woman's Guide, I talk about a study that came out. It's been out several years, called the CB Insights study, which looked at 100 businesses and why they said they failed or went out of business. And the number one was no market need. And every time I have been asked to come in and consult with an organization or with a solopreneur and ask, and they're like, hey, I want to know how much I should charge. Money always comes up. How much should I be charging? Am I charging enough? Should I go in this direction? I always ask, well, what's the market telling you? Have you done any market analysis? And it's like, you can hear the brakes, like, screech to a stop. Okay, so we start working on, well, how do you do market analysis? Because you don't know what your clients want. You don't know how to talk to them. You don't know if you're even giving them what they need. You don't know what you should be charging for it. I mean, all of those questions that people usually have can be answered by actually applying just really basic market analysis, and doing a little bit of research, and, being able to quantify and qualify some of their decisions early, and then make a strategic move off of that. And so marketing, it fails if you don't even know what it is, who you're, what you're saying and who you're saying it to. And again, comes back to, do you know what your customers are actually looking for? Do you know what actually matters in their decision making? Because what we often find when it comes to decisions, our decisions are instantaneous, they're spontaneous, and they tend to be at a deep level based on an emotional response. Either it's a desire or a fear, we're avoiding something, we love something. And they can say on like a superficial level, like, well, these are the features that matter, but they end up making gut reactions, which is how, and I learned that years and years ago with that manufacturing company of mine, that people walked in, and when they saw my product and started touching it and caressing it, like I'd go to trade shows around the country and I'd have the booth with people just standing there going, oh my God, that doesn't say anything about stain resistance and longevity or, any of the other stuff that people think are important features in, countertop materials. It was the emotional connection to it. And you don't know those emotional connections with the people until you start asking the questions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes. I think too many people focus on the how, the what, how much it is, if you're a service-based person or a consultant, the deliverables, and that's not what is going to ultimately get people to make a decision.
Nope. Decisions are far more emotionally based than what most people realize. We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, that we're using facts, and we're really not. And this is another class that I just taught like a couple of weeks ago in Spokane, which is, we have it's called a dual model process for decision making. That there's a system one that makes an instantaneous decision at a subconscious level. Sometimes that's based on an access to an emotion, a memory, or and typically a memory, right? Like a feeling or belief of something that's already happened. Or it is I can't make sense of this right now, so I'm saying no. Or this reminds me of something I love, so I'm saying yes. No facts involved in that. No facts involved in that. And then you have the slower thinking system that rationalizes that decision of like, well, I'm making this choice because of these, bullet points that I have listed over here. But that rational decision making process is rarely involved, and that's been studied with MEG scans and CAT scans of the human brain, and watching what parts of the brain light up during decisions, and to see that those emotional parts of the brain are triggered during a decision, and when the answer comes, it's usually that's where it's falling out of. It's also why business owners make certain decisions that they do that hurt them themselves, is because they're emotional based decisions. I mean, we're human. We can't actually turn that off and become a business person that has no emotions. That just is impossible to do.
Yeah.
But from marketing, 100%, it's again, you have to talk to the emotions of all people involved, right? And get them to to believe you, feel you, be a part of your story, be a part of your product, trust you. Trust is huge. We fail to capitalize in marketing on how to actually let somebody know that they can trust you. And we think it's a collateral, or we think it's a tagline on a website, the most trusted blah, 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 blah in the blah, blah, blah industry, right? But trust is actually something that we earn, right? We know that from personal relationships. You trust people when they tell you something and then they do what they say they're going to do. You trust people when they answer the phone or their emails and they respond to you, when they acknowledge what you need. Those are actions that happen, not words on a piece of paper or on a meme or on your website. And that trust is also how you end up holding on to your clients, but that's how you win customers and clients.
That's so good. Wow. Okay. Last serious question here, which is, looking back at younger versions of you, pick one, and what advice would you give to that person?
Oh man, so many. I've been asked this questions, a few times.
Yeah, it's the name of the podcast, so I have to go there.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let me sit there and think about like
Yeah.
time feel like I can go back in time to different versions of me. What's the most pivotal one? Man, and I always struggle with this question, to be honest with you, because it's like the butterfly effect, right? If you go back in time, it's like you don't know what the implications would be further. Like all the good things go away too if you were to, try to take away the bad things. And so I usually go back in time to remind myself that it's going to be okay. And that's it.
Yeah.
Right? Because again, we can't pick the right time to make it all different, because if I go back too far, I don't have my kids, right? And I don't have all the awesome things I've learned. I may not be sitting in a place where I'm really happy with myself. And, I've said I'm healthier, wealthier, and happier than I've ever been. And yeah, the journey here was hard, but yet I'm in a place I want to be. So all I can do is just to go back and sneak in the ear of every version of myself in the past and just keep reminding her that it's going to be okay. And in some ways, maybe I have been doing that all along, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So those listening, maybe that's what you needed to hear today.
Yep.
Thank you for showing up and being here and sharing so much of your wisdom in such a tiny snippet of time. Will you please explain all the other projects you have going on and where people can find more of you if they're needing,
stuff,
support, needing your stuff,
yeah.
needing you?
Well, so if you are like thinking about a journey, or you're on a journey, right, of that self-awareness, right, and trying to get through some of the muck to get to a place of where you have again, greater empathy and compassion for yourself, then my One Broken Mom podcast, I started it in 2018. As you and I talked about before we started recording, I've been on hiatus this past year because I bought a house and a property for myself and my kids, and I have been all over that place just having fun working on it and stuff, but also I've had really lousy internet, and I haven't been able to schedule interviews, to do it. So I just gave myself permission also to just kind of take a break. But there are some amazing episodes. I talked with experts, people whose books I read that helped me, then turned into colleagues and friends of mine that I have on the show. And I touched on a lot of things that happened in my journey, but I also tried to make it broad enough to encapsulate maybe other experiences that other people have. But there's some fabulous stuff there that you can listen to those people and go buy their books and do that. And so it's called, again, One Broken Mom, and it's on every podcast platform that's out there. And then the book I published last year, which is called The Fearless Woman's Guide to Business, What Every Woman Needs to Know to Be a Courageous, Authentic, and Unstoppable Entrepreneur, is melding all of that journey and all of that neuroscience and some of the psychology and human stuff that we've been talking about today, and applying it to ourselves if we want to go on the path of entrepreneurship. Like, what are those lessons that I wish I knew before I started my business, right? And I talked about one of three major areas that you'd want to get into. And so that book is there. It's also an audio book, and the audio book is fabulous. I didn't narrate it. It's amazing. But again, Fearless Woman's Guide. Megan Tussing narrates it, and it's so cool to hear your own words being spoken by somebody else that it's mind blowing for me. And then if you happen to be in the wedding industry, like how you and I connected, the first book I published is, how to turn your real property into a wedding venue business. Just an easy, basic book of here's how I did 2 successful wedding venues, and here's the step-by-step guide. And that has like, you have links to my Instagram, which is really where I'm most active today, is on Instagram there. And you have links to the website. But I'm relatively accessible, but I have been doing some mental health breaks from social media in the past year. I've needed to be able to do that, and I'm happy that I did. But now I'm sitting here going, yeah, I'm about ready to come back into it. And so I'm working on another wedding book, which is going to be to help people figure out how to buy the property, right? I wrote one book on, you have a property, here's how to do a wedding venue business. And over the years, I found out a lot of people like yourself, I don't even have a property. So what do I have to do to get to there? And so I have a book called From Doubt to Decision that hopefully will be coming out in the spring, which will be how to, some of those decision-making things we talked about, applying it into weddings, but also with the tactical strategies of how do you evaluate properties? How do you make the choices? How do you narrow it down? What are you looking for when it comes to a wedding venue business, and finding property? So it's very, very niche. And that'll be in the spring, and, that kind of stuff. So I'm not hard to find.
And do you mind saying your Instagram? We'll have it linked in the show notes too. But if
Yeah, sure.
It's listening and have it pulled up.
Yep. It's Ameé_Quiriconi, Quiriconi. And then the other one is wedding_biz_coach. So I've got 2. So one will have the wedding specific stuff, and the other one is just, sometimes it's, HR leadership related, and sometimes it's a picture of my kids and the car they're working on and the yard, or, whatever else is out there. So
awesome. Well, thank you again for your time and your wisdom. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I so appreciate you and everything that you brought today. So thank you.
Oh gosh, Kelsey, thank you so much for inviting me for it. I really do. I value when everybody's so into like sharing knowledge and stuff like that. So I'm here for that as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yes. And listeners, if you have someone you want to reach out to who's an expert in the field and you're intimidated, this is your nudge to do it. And we're the example that it's worth it. So
100%, 100%.
I hope you take that and run with it. Listeners, thank you so much. We'll catch you next week.